All right, History 362. So today we're going to be talking about the Second Macedonian War, although admittedly that's from the Roman perspective. We could equally call it the Second Roman War if we want to take the perspective of the Antigonid dynasty. So in 200 BC, the Romans have declared war on Macedonia, and I think the most plausible explanation, again, is that they are alarmed by the pact between the kings, Philip and Antiochus the Great, to divide the resources of the Ptolemaic dynasty. And Philip, of course, himself has been on a rampage throughout the Aegean, in campaigns in Caria, a siege of Abydos on the Hellespont, and of course the Hellespont is a key strategic thoroughfare. If you control cities across the Hellespont, you control the grain supply coming in from the Black Sea into the Aegean, and Philip successfully captures Abydos. And the final declaration of war arrives as Philip is menacing Athens. So the Romans at this point are, on one hand, exhausted by the Second Punic War, which they've been fighting continuously against Hannibal from 218 to 201. The carnage and losses of the Second Punic War have significantly reduced the size of the Roman citizen population. It also means, however, that the Roman army is going to be in a very high form. The Romans, not unlike the Macedonians, have a citizen militia. They don't really have the ability to train their troops. They don't have any kind of standing full-time army. But their citizen militia has been fighting continuously for well over a decade. So the citizen soldiers themselves are highly experienced. And indeed, it seems that one during the Roman hesitation about whether to declare war on Macedonia, there is a desire to excuse veterans of the last campaign of the Second Punic War, but also these veterans can't be conscripted, but they can volunteer because, again, the consuls going to war want to raise the most experienced armies possible. That being said, the war is less easy and less efficacious than the Romans might hope. Now, diplomatically, they've actually found a good deal of support in Greece. The Antolians are recruited for yet another round, and the Achaeans are, let's just say, wavering. But they eventually also come over to Rome in 198 BC. So that means the Romans, who are taking a lay of the land, are successful in detaching not just the Antolians, who are really pretty much always ready to go to war with Macedonia, but also the Achaeans, who have over the 3rd century wavered between hostility to Macedonia and alliance with Macedonia. But by 198, the Achaeans seem to be convinced that the Romans are likely to win. Now, unlike the First Macedonian War, where the Romans do not commit any major land resources, the Romans quickly send a large consular army, so 2 Roman legions, 2 wings of Italian allies, as this is about 20,000 men. Philip V at this time seems to be trying to raise as many soldiers as he can, but it is a real challenge for him. This is a point where Macedonia's population is probably simply not big enough to match the kind of numbers that the Romans, even after all of their losses to Hannibal, are able to put up with ease. And indeed, we have a remarkable document called the Macedonian Conscription Diagramma, which actually lists the policies for recruiting Macedonian soldiers for the Second Macedonian War. Probably these are general policies that have been around for a while, but it seems to be inscribed probably for the exceptional conscription of the Macedonian War. And essentially the rule of thumb is each household, each oikos, needs to provide 1 soldier. But there is a sort of attempt to try to prevent either underage boys or young boys, boys under the age of 20, adolescents under the age of 20, and older men from going. You can recruit some of these underage boys or older men if there is no one else in the household to go. Ideally, however, these would remain a reserve, and that a more able-bodied man, ideally 20 to 50, would be the conscript provided for the Macedonian army. But the fact that we have this sort of administrative policy, who has to go, who gets excused, what age, what's the ideal age of the conscript, shows that the Macedonian state is really trying to go house to house to make sure that it has the soldiers to repel the Roman invasion. So that's a piece of epigraphic evidence that actually sort of corresponds but complements our literary evidence, where the historian Livy just says, well, Philip is throwing old men and boys into his army because he's desperate to scrounge up the manpower. Now, the Romans, who are coming from the Adriatic, do manage to penetrate through the Ayustena Pass. This is a steep pass that Philip had initially hoped to use as a choke point to prevent the Romans from penetrating into the Balkans. And this allows them to operate in central Greece. That being said, the first years of the war are stalemated. The Romans aren't able to score a decisive victory. This leads to frustration at home, and Roman commanders switch in and out. And there's even a mutiny of Roman soldiers in 198, including complaints by veterans of the Hannibalic War that they were illegally conscripted. It's probably Romans who volunteered, thinking there'd be a quick war and a lot of loot, and are now angry that they're stuck in this stalemated slog in the Balkans. So finally, a new consul is elected in 198. He is Titus Quinctius Flamininus. He is supposedly a bit of a Philhellene, although there's no evidence that he's particularly dispatched to the Greek, or to the war in Macedonia and Greece because of any Philhellenic sympathies or talents that he has. He can speak Greek, among other things, because the way the Romans assign command is through lot, and he just picks the lot. He's a somewhat interesting figure. This is going to be his first military command. Nonetheless, he has some modest successes, including staging a coup in some Boeotian communities that had been pro-Philip, replacing those governments with anti-Macedonian factions. He also has some frustrations. So, for example, he's trying to besiege a Thessalian town called Atrax, and they managed to cause part of the wall to collapse by undermining it, and the Romans go in to try to go through the breach of the wall, and they're met with a detachment of the Macedonian phalanx, that dense wall of pikes and shields, and this detachment of the phalanx manages to completely push the Romans out of the breach. And indeed, by 197, Flamininus is worried that his forces, with the Romans with their arms and equipment and tactics, won't be able to beat the disciplined phalanx of Philip V. There is, now Philip, however, who realizes that he is losing ground, does engage in peace negotiations. And Flamininus, who is worried that he might be replaced by a successor, by another general, seems ready to possibly offer pretty reasonable terms. However, the peace negotiations break down, and Flamininus gets his command renewed, so he's willing to try one more time to try to confront Philip. The final battle of the Second Macedonian War takes place in Thessaly at Kounos Kephali. Essentially, Flamininus and his legions are maneuvering, supported by, among others, a large Antolian detachment of 6,000 light infantry and 400 Antolian cavalry. They've been maneuvering in Thessaly for several weeks, but some of the light infantry in the Antolian vanguard makes contact with some of the light infantry in Philip's army, and they do so in a kind of heavy mist. So this is a kind of encounter battle. Both armies know the other is out there. They finally bump into each other, and both sides sort of have to decide how much they want to commit to the skirmish. And as it is, both sides do commit additional forces to the skirmish, which moves up into some high ground, some high kind of rolling hills, which are just basically the Romans are to kind of the south, the Macedonians are to the north, coming off of this high ground. So Flamininus has his army formed up. The Roman legions don't fight in a big dense block. They rather fight in little small companies of about 120 men called maniples. So all of these maniples that are arrayed in 3 different lines are formed up while the skirmishers fight in these rolling hills. And meanwhile, Philip is moving his main heavy phalanx. Again, he's got their 20-plus foot pikes, their dense ranks. The phalanx is maneuvering across a ridge that stands above where the Roman army is drawn up. And Philip, who looks down, all of a sudden realizes that he has the Roman army kind of where he wants them. He can now attack charging down this ridge and taking advantage of the momentum of his position to drive the Romans back. Now, there's one little problem for Philip. He's only got about half of his phalanx drawn up. The other half is still kind of in a marching formation. And so he makes a kind of tactical call to attack with the half of the troops that he's got. So he forms up half of his phalanx, charges down the ridge, and crashes into the Roman left. And here, the Macedonian phalanx completely pushes back the Romans. The Roman legion, these little tiny maniples, and the Roman soldiers themselves don't carry big pikes. They're armed with javelins and very short swords. The Roman blade is about 25, 26, 27 inches long. That's not much of a match for a big 20-foot sarissa. And so the Roman left is pushed back. Flamininus, however, realizes that the Macedonians on their right, on his right, the ones that are still forming up, and therefore decides to attack with his right. And this leads to a kind of bifurcated battle. The Romans are doing really well on their right. The Macedonians are doing well on their right. And so you have sort of 2 battles going on. The Macedonians winning half, the Romans winning half. The battle, however, ends when an anonymous Roman officer, a military tribune, on the Roman right, so the side where the Romans are doing well and are actually fighting up the hill and defeating the Macedonians, he realizes that in his part of the battle the Romans are doing well, but he looks down the ridge and realizes that on the other side of the ridge the Romans are in deep trouble. And therefore, basically he makes his own decision on his own initiative, detaches 20 maniples, probably from the 3rd line of the Roman legions, and transfers them to the other side of the battlefield. And they crash into the rear of Philip's phalanx, surround it, and this ends the battle with horrendous slaughter. Philip himself escapes, and nonetheless, over 8,000 Macedonian soldiers are killed. Another 5,000 or so are captured and enslaved. And Philip, while he manages to escape, realizes that this is a blow that he cannot recover from, either in terms of his royal image or even, frankly, demographically. There were, at this point, only about 16,000 Macedonian soldiers in his main phalanx. And when you think about that basically means if you're giving 1 soldier per household, that's 8,000 households that have lost someone killed, and another 5,000 households that have lost someone enslaved. This is a massive, devastating event to the entire community of Macedonians. And so Philip comes to terms. Now the terms are conditional. That is, Philip is not forced to perform an unconditional surrender. Nonetheless, he must give up his garrisons. He has to give up the fetters at Chalcis, at Acrocorinth, at Demetrius. He must basically lose his hegemony over all of the Greek communities. And he has to pay the Romans an indemnity. 500 talents up front. A talent of silver is about 60 pounds of silver. And then 50 talents per year for 10 years. And he also has restrictions placed on him. Can't have any more than a dozen warships, can't have war elephants, and can't maintain an army of more than 5,000 men. He's still allowed to have an army because the Romans realize that someone has to keep all of the barbarians who live around the Danube from raiding and migrating down towards Greece. So they allow Philip to maintain enough of an army, basically, to hold his northern frontier. But Philip keeps his kingdom, and, well, that's something. The Antolians think that they are going to get control of a number of these Greek communities that have been freed from Macedonian hegemony to expand the Antolian League. After all, the Antolians had played a significant part in the Battle of Kunos-Caphylae. They had been all of the folks who were skirmishing, fighting, and dying in this heavy fog. But now a real schism opens between Aetolia and the Romans. Because Flamininus decides that he's not going to say, okay, all these cities who think, say, yay, we're free from the Macedonians. He's like, I'm not going to give them to the Aetolians to be forcibly incorporated into the Aetolian League. And he makes this official at Corinth during the Isthmian Games, the games that are held there every 4 years, when he makes an incredible declaration that is going to define what Roman policy is going to look like in Greece now that Philip V has been defeated. And indeed, a lot of Greeks don't know what it's going to look like. They sort of assume that the Romans are going to act like a Hellenistic king would act, going to maintain Roman garrisons at the Acrocorinth and Chalcis and Demetrius, possibly exert some kind of tribute, demand some kind of tribute payment. That wouldn't surprise anybody if the Romans do this. But Flamininus stands before an assembled crowd at Corinth. He speaks notably in Latin, and I think this is quite likely an act of hegemonic intention to say, hey, look, I'm about to announce something, but I don't feel the need to speak it in your language, even though I could. Flamininus speaks Greek perfectly well. He instead speaks in Latin and then has heralds act as translators to tell the crowd what he's saying. However, once that translation takes place, the crowd likes what it hears because Philip declares the freedom of the Greeks, mobilizing a slogan that has been around since the wars of the Diadochoi. Here actually shows that the Romans are really aware of the vocabulary of Hellenistic diplomacy. So he proclaims the freedom of the Greeks. The Greek cities will be ungarrisoned. That's a big definition of autonomy. They will not pay tribute, another big declaration of autonomy. They will have their own laws. They will be autonomous. And this makes the crowd go wild. Indeed, some of our reports suggest, in fact, you've read about the freedom of the Greeks when, I'm afraid, the things got a little out of hand. But the crowd goes wild, and indeed for a while it seems that Flamininus' handlers are afraid that he will be injured as they all mob around him, desperate to shake his hand and thank him. There's one group of people who's really unhappy about this, and of course it's the Antolians. They feel like they've been screwed over, not once, but twice. During the First Macedonian War, the Romans leave them hanging, cause Philip to smash up their capital, and they're forced to surrender. And now in the Second Macedonian War, when the Antolians have made real contributions to the victory, the Antolians probably oversell their contribution. It seems there is an Antolian narrative that they were the ones who won the Battle of Kunos-Caphylae, which is unquestionably a victory of the Roman legions. But still, they've been carrying the Romans' baggage since 214 BC, and what do they get? Nothing. This makes the Antolians quite angry. And so next time we will talk about how the Romans, once the last of the legions, the Antolians, after the last Roman legion withdraws, how they seek to reorder what the freedom of the Greeks looked like by inviting Antiochus III to invade Greece. So next time we'll talk about the war between Rome and the Seleucid Empire. I'll see you then.